Hello, I'm Slick and welcome back to the second channel geography video. This is a series where I talk about geography and the world and stuff. And today, I figured I wanted to talk about a country which I've been meaning to for quite some time, but I realized it will never come up in my borders series, so why not instead just talk about it in its own standalone video, because I wanted to talk about a country which is the smallest in the EU, not just by population, but by land area as well. That's right, today we're going to be talking about Malta, and its location between Tunisia and Italy. Its location in the EU is the weird kind of lower end estimate of how many people can live in an EU member state. There's all these interesting questions that immediately come from that, and today I want to answer at least a few of them because Malta's interesting for all of these weird background reasons, to do with the EU, to do with Italy, to do with Tunisia, to do with its British Empire history. They drive on the left, for instance. But today I wanted to talk about some of the interesting things in the country to do with tourism, partly because I'm actually going there on Friday, in case you're curious. So if you live in Malta and want to meet up, at the end of the video there'll be details on that. However, for the meantime, let's talk about some of the weirdest things about the country, because the scale of the country is something you can never really realize when you're talking about it. Like, you can see looking on the map right now, like, oh, it's a big island or a small island, right? But one of my favorite ways to just drive the perspective home of how small Malta is, and the fact that it really blurs the line between micro country and non-micro country, is the fact that the airport, which is located pretty south on the island, and the Valletta, which is located pretty east on the island, if you wanted to walk from the airport to the capital of the island, which most people drive it, but you can walk in about an hour and 27 minutes. Or if you want to go to the waterfront, a fairly popular place too. Oh, I did that one entirely wrong. But if you want to go to the waterfront, it takes you about an hour and 90 minutes. It is often, depending on the conditions, a worthwhile decision to walk from the airport to the capital city of the country, which is a wild thing. And when I say the airport, it's the only airport in the country. Another sign it's a microstate. But yeah, basically, Malta is a country which has a big booming tourism industry, and that's why one of the first things I learned about the country was about the Azure window. However, if you've learned about the Azure window too, or have learned about it in the last few years, here's the interesting thing about Google Maps. They updated what used to be one of Malta's most famous tourist attractions, has 1,100 reviews. It's pretty overwhelmingly positive. However, that was before 2016. In 2016, something kind of tragic happened, and that was the Azure window collapse, which means this is the world's, one of Malta's formerly most popular attractions. This is what it looked like using a Google Street View from 2016, a few months before it collapsed. You can see there is the Azure window. It's a beautiful thing. You can see underneath it. You can see through it. It's like a cave but behind a thing. And what actually happened in late 2016 is it actually collapsed. The main pillar fell down, and then basically there's nothing you can see there anymore. If you want to go to the again, you can now go to the remains of it. You can go to the ruins of it, and now what you see instead is you just see a bunch of like, oh wait, this is also September 2016. Look how nice it looked. It's a really wonderful thing. People would go there. It was like one of Malta's big attractions. However, now when you go there, what you see instead is just a what are the odds of getting free ones from the current one? But yeah, most of the time you go there, you just see this big like pile of ruins, and it's like, okay, well that's a thing now. I think this is actually on top of it. But yeah, my point is now you can't actually see the main thing itself. What you see is the ruins, and I think that's crazy. That's one of like the first major attractions to go from want to visit the attraction to want to visit where the attraction used to be. And yeah, Malta is full of interesting stories like that, at least in my opinion, such as another one of the fairly famous things on the island, which is the Popeye village. Again, I saw this on the map and I was like, okay, it's called Popeye Village. What's the deal with that? They actually filmed one of the Popeye movies here. And because they figured like, well, we filmed it all the way in Malta, we still at the thing, it's not really worth taking down, so they just turned it into a place where you can go to the Popeye set, which is weird and wacky to see it looking like this, because the film industry in Malta is quite big, not just for Popeye movies, but also for many other types of movies. One of the things Malta realized, because Malta's had a long and turbulent history, going back and forth between various, you might imagine based on the fact that it's between Italy and Tunisia, there's some weird influences in both countries. There definitely is, but they also have a huge British history, because, Britain and Ireland, you know how it goes. Oh wait, look, I'm wearing the New Zealand shirt, what a perfect example of that. But you know how this stuff goes, right? So it has an interesting cross between the British history, and they use the the British plug socket, they use the British side of the road, but then also there's a heavy Italian third language sentiment. A lot of people go via Italy to get to various places, and there's like a close connection to Italy, especially within the EU sort of thing. But then their language is a Semitic language, which means it derived in some form from Arabic. Tunisians actually have the best understanding of Malta people, which means that when Maltese people speak to Tunisians Italians understand what Maltese people are saying, at least they understand a fair amount of it, around half, whereas in the reverse, it's not true in the slightest. Maltese people can't understand Tunisia. It's not one of those weird things where it's like, what? How is that a thing? And it is a thing because their history is such a weird mix of so many countries. They have the huge history of World War II, of course. They're one of the key factors that led to the World War II victory. And basically, yeah, Malta is a wild place that honestly you don't even realize when you look at a map. It's like one of those islands that's fairly small, but it is its fully own independent country, with its own independent language, its own independent everything, including its own people which speak Maltese. So it's worth noting, I've said this before, and I want to just have the little asterisk on this. Maltese is the official national language. Again, it's Semitic based, which means it's kind of derived from Arabic, but it's written in a Latin alphabet, which means that you see names which look normal, but they're all Arabic normal. If that's a thing, I hope that's a correct way to put it for any linguists out there. Apologies if I got that a little bit mixed up, but it is an Arabic-ish language in Latin, to put things simple. So basically, that's a weird enough thing by itself. However, because of the long British history and because of the fact that English is obviously a very key language to be business friendly, pretty much everyone on the Maltese islands will speak, English as a result. So I mentioned once I had a Maltese business partner about 10 years ago. When I was like super young. I don't know if he knew. I was like 14 at the time. But I had a Maltese business partner and he spoke perfect English. I generally didn't even realize that so the Maltese is the is the first language there. Because yeah, that's just a thing that's widely accepted. Friendly and English seems to be the general consensus. That it's good English too, because of the former British colony thing. So here's the interesting thing about Malta, moving on from that, because I mentioned the capital is called Valletta, right? This is it right there. It's, if you count this as being their capital, which Malta does, I mean, technically any city can, if a country calls a city their capital, you have to kind of accept it, but Malta calls their capital Valletta, and therefore Valletta is their capital, and if you take that to be it, again, then it would be the smallest capital of any EU country, and pretty much any European country that's not a microstate too, and even including microstates, because they're usually city-states, so that's a pretty weird thing by itself. But the weirder thing is the fact that the islands are pretty much one continuous developed area. There aren't, giant forests of undiscovered stuff. Even when you take Gozo, which is the island which has the Azure Window, or the Azure Window ruins now, and Camino, both these islands are still fairly developed, which is, pretty wild to look at. So you can see it's just non-stop developments of like towns and stuff. You do see some farms and some farmlands and some, plains, etc. However, for the most part, it is just a continuously developed place. They have a very high population density because despite being the smallest country by population and the smallest by land area, that still means they're quite highly packed into there, which is, I think that's kind of an interesting fact you might not necessarily realize. So, the other thing you might not necessarily realize is just how close everything is. I mentioned how Valletta, again, the capital, is pretty, close to the airport, despite looking like it's about a third of the island across. And the truth is, all of Malta, if you really wanted to, you could walk without too much of a difficulty. Like, even if you want to walk from Valletta to, let's just say you want to walk to Gozo. You have to take a ferry in between, of course, but if you want to go to Gozo and you want to go to, like, I don't know, Victoria, the main thing, it's still 7 hours, which I know is, like, a long, long time, but that means that you can kind of see how it's, like, it's on the upper edge of being, it's obviously not a micro country, and it's obviously not a city-state, but it's very, very close. It's a continuous area, but despite the fact that it's a continuous area, it still has one of the highest, again, car ownership rates in the EU, and one of the highest in Europe after San Marino, which is kind of a wild thing to me, that they import a bunch of cars that have to be from Britain or a left side driving nation, of course, and then they use a whole bunch of them just to get around, which means that because the entire island was built not with that in mind, most streets around here are kind of thin and narrow, not really built for that. So it's meant to be an entire nightmare during rush hour because most streets look like this. Like this is just how it is going around Malta. And again, this is part of this looking like this. One, it's super beautiful, right? And two, you'll start to notice, remember how I said the film industry is big here? You'll notice how a lot of the country is looking like some movie you've watched, partly, or Game of Thrones in particular, partly because of stuff like that. Yeah, if you go around here, you're like, yeah, it's got that Mediterranean kind of vibe, but then also it's got the whole British thing mixed in. And yeah, looking here, you can see just a whole mess, right? So yeah, getting around the country is kind of tricky because of that. And in fact, this is something, according to Google. So Google has its own system to rank what is a highway, expressway, or whatever versus a regular road. Although Google lists all of the main routes in Malta, so it shows Route 1, Route 16, it shows Route 7, etc. It shows all the routes. It only counts one road in the entirety of Malta, Gozo, and Camino, which are the 3 islands that make up Malta. There's more, but the 3 main islands that make up Malta. Out of the entire 3 islands, there is one road that counts as like an expressway, and it is this one right here. It's the one, and it goes through here. It's less than 3 kilometers wide, long in case you're curious. And the thing that makes this an express road as opposed to anything else is because it's tunneled, and because I think it's 2 lanes in each direction, which is wild by Maltese standards. Oh, my bad. We've gone a little bit to the left there, but you know this is wild. Look at this. This is 2 lanes going each direction, and there's something kind of interesting about that to me, that like this is the closest thing there is to a highway, because again, it's not really needed. If we take the exact same things we did before, we're like, okay, so we're going to go from Valletta, the capital, all the way to Victoria, which is like the big settlement on Gozo, all the way on the other side of the country. It's 7 hours if you want to walk it. You can actually take buses and stuff, well, apparently, of course, this not, but it also is only like an hour and a bit to drive, and realistically, that would be significantly less. It's not a very big country, it's not very far across, and therefore transport isn't a very big issue. Also, they have buses, which, interestingly enough to me at least, is are more expensive during the summer because they have such a big industry in tourism. So yeah, Malta is one of those countries that kind of worked out fairly early on at least, that like, okay, so, being an island country really means you have to take advantage of services that don't require land area. So financial services, kind of like, the UK or any other island country, Singapore, Hong Kong, are kind of a big thing here. Shipping, they have one of the biggest shipping ports, the Maltese Freeport, is one of the like top 50 biggest in the world, one of the top 12, I think, in Europe. It's a big port. It's a big, despite the fact that they're a tiny country, they have a lot of shipping going in and out, which they can do because they're an island. They've always been good at that. They have financial services, they have tourism, they have film, all the industries that you can convince to come to you from elsewhere, Malta is kind of doing a good job at, and even though they're fairly low down the EU list of countries by wealth, they're growing significantly every year, and that's why one of my favorite facts is because one of the fastest ways that they grow their national economy is by trying to boost tourism and foreign investment, and one of the ways they get foreign investment in is with their citizenship by investment. So also, no notifications, goldenvisas.com. But citizenship by investment in Malta. So again, this is just a page to show that it is a thing. It's a nice little graph there. You can actually buy Maltese citizenship. It's one of the very few EU memberships, EU passports, you can just buy straight up. All you have to do is spend 650,000, give it to the National Development Fund, and then have government-approved financial instruments, and then commit to have residence in Malta for 5 years. So it's not quite buying it, it's buying a fast track to entry, which seems less abusive, I would say. Also, you need to have a minimum of 350,000 euros in real estate, and also every family member has to give you extra money. But basically, 1.2 million euros, and you are in. You get one of the most powerful citizenships in the world. Again, if you're from the UK or the US watching this, which statistically you are, not more powerful than your citizenship, but if you live in an African or you live in a, like a South Asian country, there's a lot of countries where this is a significant boost, South American even, a significant boost to your passport strength. So yeah, 1.2 million, and you can get yourself a nice EU passport, easy access to all EU countries, and also to the world as a result, which is a little bit of a weird one by itself. Again, a part of me is always torn between whether this is a really cool thing for a country, like they make €1.2 on one passport, that's a good value, versus they're kind of exploiting the Europe, the EU passport for their own, gain. It's a weird one on some level. I don't know fully how I feel about that one, but here's the crazy thing about Malta. So every year, Maltese tourism increase. Like, you might have heard about Malta in some form, through some form of tourism thing, and be like, oh yeah, Malta, I've heard something about that, right? So here's the interesting thing about Malta. Because more and more tourists pour every year, the interesting thing is that makes Malta richer. It's part of the many things. Their economy does fairly well most years, and because Maltese people get richer every year, more and more of them go abroad for vacation. So as more and more people come into holiday in Malta, more Maltese people leave to go on holiday elsewhere, and that's just one of the funny things about the modern economy. Like, apparently that just works out. Like, British people go to Malta for holidays, and then Maltese people go to Britain, or Italians, and like Maltese people. There's just a weird spot that goes on all the time, and it's like, I guess that's how the modern world works. Bit of a weird one, probably not too friendly for the for all these different things, but it's interesting to talk about regardless. So yeah, Malta has one airport. I think I briefly mentioned this earlier. So it has one major road that's counted by Google as being a high/expressway, and they have one airport it's got 2 runways, but one functional runway for most planes to land on, with one airport terminal, with one VIP lounge, and one, etc., etc., etc. The country is, in my opinion, in the early stages of becoming a highly developed city-state. You can see every year they are one of the better performing countries in so many different measures, and I think, it's not that anything's even necessarily holding them back, but it is one of those countries where it's like, so Malta is one of those places that, when you are an old person, unless you're an old person now, in which case, sorry, sometime in the future, what's going to happen is I feel like there's going to be a significant boost in, Malta's position in the world. They'll be the equivalent of a Monaco or of a Singapore or something like that. And it's kind of cool to see it in its early stages. Like, you always, when you hear about the success story of, like, becoming a wealthy power by getting all these international things in, you hear about Dubai or Singapore or Hong Kong, it's like, yeah, that worked for them, but will it work for anyone else? And Malta is to some extent trying a moderate version of that strategy, and we'll see how that goes. And I guess actually interesting enough, speaking of how that goes, Malta's airport grows every year too. They have direct flights now to not only like Dubai and a few other weird places like Israel, but also you can fly starting I think next year direct to Doha, and then via the rest of the world. There's just a lot of wild development always happening all the time, which is pretty cool in my opinion. So yeah, with that kind of mostly out of the way, I just wanted to say Malta is again, I want to now address it at least a little bit. Malta's going to be one of those really interesting points, though, is like, it's the biggest country that's not counted as a micro-country in Europe, and the smallest EU member. Again, micro-countries in the EU are one of those, like, they'll deal with it later kind of things. When the EU, as the EU slowly evolves into a more federal state, if you don't believe that's a thing, then I mean, it's like a widely known thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not a thing that's politically wanted everywhere right now. But as the EU slowly federalizes more, Malta's one of those weird examples of a country that gets a very above its, population share. Like, for every commission member, every country has one. Malta, cleans up. Every person has a high amount of power that way. And also, for every, EU MEP, there's like, every Maltese citizen gets like 6 MEPs between them, whereas every German MEP goes for like 800,000 Germans. So, like, there's a weird thing going on there with, like, the proportions. Also, speaking, by the way, of politics in Malta, one of my favorite things about Malta is that they switched to the single transferable vote. So, if you don't know, first past the post is it's just a bad system. Like, you can defend it because you think the bad system has good results sometimes, and that's... Honestly, I think it's a fair enough defense of the system. Like, sure, I'll accept that, but I think single transferable vote is, in most ways, objectively better, especially if you don't have a large country in land area. So, because, the whole debate about, like, oh, land area means this. So if you have a fairly small country, like Malta does, then you can switch to something called the single transferable vote. So that's where the votes look like this. Every district has elects MEPs, the number of votes... I can't explain single transferable vote here, but watch a video on it, or just take my word for it that it's a proportional system. So basically, your votes nationwide calculate to your seats nationwide, and also there's none of that, like you have to vote for the giant douche turd sandwich thing. There's none of that. You have to pick for the lesser of two evils, because you pick your first choice, then your second choice, then your third choice, fourth choice, fifth choice, etc. So if you really want the National Party, the right-wing party, to get in over the left-wing party, the Labour Party, however, you really believe in the Democratic Party, you can vote the Democratic and then have your second choice be the Nationalist, or vice versa with any of these party choices. And here's the interesting thing. Every other country that does this usually gets a strong third party showing, because people can vote for who they want to. But Malta's an example of a country that, like, if the people like the two main parties enough, they don't start voting third party. Single transferable vote is often hated because, like, you won't get a strong government, and it's like, just make a strong political party that actually appeals to the majority of people, and it can actually work. There are majorities in Malta all the time, because most people, years after, still vote for the two major parties. I think it's actually quite a breakthrough that the Democratic Party, the third party, got a single seat in this last election in District 10 over there. But, like, Malta's one of those weird countries that has a two-party system in a fair election system, and it's a good example of, like, even if you like two-party politics, which I think you're wild if you do, right? Like, look at insert last election in your country if you have it, and then look at insert last election in UK, US, etc., and you're like, my God, that is a depressing world to want to live in. But even if you do, you can get a two-party system as long as the parties still appeal to the electorate, which sometimes does happen. Not everywhere turns into a Germany. You do get Maltas in there as well. So yeah, Malta, interesting country. Like I said, though, I'm actually going this weekend. It's going to be as part of the status video. I don't know how long that takes to edit. There's a lot of fun points I want to show off and, like, properly explain on screen. So when I go there, it's going to be to get One World Emerald status. I'm like super hyped because, like, I've never gotten the whole airline status thing before, but I'm going to Malta for 2 days, like Friday morning to like a Sunday something. I'm going a couple days this weekend. If you're in Malta, a Maltese citizen perhaps, or a Maltese person, or you're not, if you just are in Malta for whatever reason this weekend, let me know. ibx2cat@gmail.com. Send me an email. Say, hey, I am this, and I like this, that, and maybe you would like that, this, and these things. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see... Wait. No, that's not my usual outro. Thank you very much for watching this one. I know the Geography of Toy Cats kind of fit in between. Again, this channel is kind of like the fun thing I do on the side. I've been super busy on the main channel, as you probably... I mean, actually, not... most people don't necessarily follow that, but if you do, you know I'm super busy there. I've been live streaming a whole bunch. If you don't, probably January, I'll be back busy here because I'm going to Switzerland, like, not Switzerland, Canada and America, like I've already mentioned. So there'll be some fun stuff happening, but like, just December's so busy for me. So I hope you all understand why I vanish for how many days at a time. And if you don't understand, then you're not. Second channel, don't care. Goodbye.